Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all having a great start to your week. Today I wanted to talk about this because it's come up both in sessions and I see it in message groups on Facebook a lot. A person will come on or come into a session and they'll say something to the effect of, I asked my husband to stop watching porn and he refuses to stop. He just won't. And I think it's really important that we have a distinction between won't and can't, because there's one thing for someone to have a boundary and express that with their partner, but then it's another thing for their partner to have bodily autonomy and to have choice and to have the ability to make decisions for themselves as an adult. So that's where the issues lie sometimes. But then other times I think a lot of women are shocked by the amount of porn addiction that's out there these days, and the effect that it can have on men and on relationships. And so sometimes they'll already be in a relationship and it won't be a boundary that they thought that they needed to set. And then they'll be in this relationship to a point where, there's lots of deep feelings and, they want to make this relationship work, and they realize that their partner has an addiction to porn that maybe they didn't recognize early on. And especially during the honeymoon stage, probably didn't come up. Because, a lot of addictions can be hidden for a while, right? A lot of people can function and appear to be handling everything in healthy ways, and then you've come to find out that they're actually, using, a substance or some sort of behavioral addiction to cope or manage with, whatever they're dealing with. And so it's not always apparent. And then you have women who've been in relationships with men who've had porn addictions, who just really don't want that as, a part of their lives going forward, and that's a boundary they set. And I think if you go into a relationship expressing that to someone and they, agree with that and, want to live that way as well, then I think it can be really, it's great. There can be a really deep connection around that. And so, but what's often happening is that sometimes people aren't truthful about their level of porn watching, or sometimes they don't know that it's an issue because it hasn't come up before for them in a relationship, or maybe they haven't been in a relationship for a while and they developed this addiction because they were single, and you know what I mean? So there's lots of ways in which someone could enter a relationship with the intention of it not being an issue without recognizing that it already is an issue. And so they're not necessarily lying to their partner so much as maybe they're lying to themselves a bit. So there's lots of different ways that this shows up in relationships, and I think we're just maybe now starting to talk about the the damages that porn addiction can do, because it's so all through history, especially recorded history, there are ways in which humans have engaged with erotica and the erotic, and through depiction of the female form, the male form, and all that stuff. And so it's always been a part of who we were, going back many, many years. And so I think that's just, especially for people who are very visual and very visually stimulated, it's always been there. The difference is that it wasn't always there 24/7. It wasn't always there at the touch of a finger, right? It was something that maybe you engaged in occasionally, and therefore it was a treat. Just like lots of things that aren't necessarily all bad and negative, but when we use it in excess, that's where we have issues, right? So, having a bowl of ice cream, well, if you're not, dairy allergic, but just in general, like if you have a bowl of ice cream every once in a while, that can be a really nice, sweet treat. And you can really enjoy it, and it's not going to have, lasting dramatic effects on your health. I mean, it's not great for you, but it's not going to and again, unless you're allergic like I am, it's not going to really, create this negative impact on your overall health to have it every once in a while. But if you were to start to have it every single day, maybe the excess sugar and fats and whatnot in it would start to negatively affect your mental and physical health, right? Maybe it would start to affect your gut health, and that has an impact on your hormonal health, and it would cascade or build on itself over time, right? And so that's what happens with porn watching. If it's not just every once in a while, if it's not just something you do occasionally, if it's not just something you do every once in a while to have a little spice, right, to add a little kink in, right, then it becomes an issue because it's actually altering brain function, brain chemistry, and then it's affecting your moods and your ability to have other coping mechanisms to help with stress and pain, right? So if you are in a relationship with someone and this is a hard boundary for you and your partner is refusing to stop, ask yourself, is this a can't or a won't? And in most cases, it's probably a can't. But we also shouldn't rule out the fact that it could be a won't. And, maybe that's a deal breaker for you. And that's sad. But if it's a deal breaker for you, it's a deal breaker for you. And it's important to not try to change someone whose beliefs might be different. So maybe your beliefs are, and your thoughts around watching it are based on your religious beliefs or your spiritual beliefs. Or maybe it's based on the knowledge that you have around the damage it can do to someone's brain chemistry and whatnot. And all of those beliefs are valid and true for you, and you should stick to them if they're yours. However, much like anything, we cannot enforce our beliefs onto another person. And so if you're with someone who, for whatever reason, is not willing to give up this thing that is a strong belief for you, and it's a boundary, then you can stay and you can fight about it and fight about it and fight about it. However, that's not necessarily going to change their thinking and behaviors around this, right? So much like other addictions, we can't love someone enough to change them. We can't shame them into changing. And, if it's something that they want to have in their life, you're not going to necessarily change that thinking in them if it's something that they feel strongly about. So, because we can flip it and say, if I'm a person who utilizes porn every once in a while because I like the visual stimulation or whatever, and it's different than how I normally engage with sexual energy, then I might say, well, I'm an adult and I'm making an informed decision based on what I know around the risks and whatnot, and you've explained the risks to me and I understand them and I do validate those risks. Those are true. However, for myself, I don't feel like that's an issue for me, and I still want to be able to engage in this. And so they're just as right in having that as their boundary or belief. And so then what do you do from there? So if neither of you are willing to bend or going to bend in your thinking, and I don't think either of you necessarily have to, and I'm not saying you should. In fact, I would say the opposite. I think if that's something that you feel strongly about, then I think you should find someone who feels equally as strong about it, or who is maybe neutral to it and just doesn't care either way, right? And could be happy without having it in their life, and would be happy to engage in it occasionally, but again, don't need it, right? So that's, that's maybe what you're needing to do in your life, is to, be upfront about that and sort through people who don't hold the same beliefs and let them go, right? If you find yourself in a relationship where you thought that this was a belief that was shared, and now they're not sharing the same sort of values and beliefs around it, and their actions are different than maybe what they had previously said, again, you're not going to necessarily change that in them until they're willing to recognize the impact and damage it's doing to themselves and to the relationship. And that might be, them sort of losing the relationship in order for them to realize that. However, staying in the relationship and not staying true to your boundaries is probably going to just lead to resentment over time, and it's just going to erode the relationship further. So I'm not one to just say, boot the person to the curb, get rid of them, or get out of that relationship. I don't think that people should do that on a dime. However, I do feel that it's important that we find people whose morals and values and goals and dreams in life align. And then if for some reason someone's struggling with an addiction, then we can support them through their healing process. But I don't think it's necessary for us to stay if they're not willing to engage in that healing process themselves. I think it's, excuse me, it's certainly reasonable for us to create some distance between us and them, because eventually that's just going to, keep negatively impacting our mental health and our physical health, right? So, I don't think that that's a selfish thing to do at all. I think each person has the right to decide how they want to engage with the erotic and erotica, right? So, and on what level and in what ways. And I think it's important for couples to communicate those ideas and feelings around it. And if your feelings are changing around it, it's certainly, important that you voice that in your relationship so that you can have open communication around how this will look. And maybe there is some compromise to be had. And yet I think if it's veering into addiction where they are unable to stop, and it's becoming an issue that's affecting lots of areas of their lives, and it's not just their emotional and physical connection with you, but maybe in other ways too. Like, I think it's very reasonable to have a conversation with them around seeking help, and maybe the support that you offer is to sort of maybe gather some resources for them, and to let them know that if you're willing to, and if you think you have the capacity to stay, to help them through their healing journey, but also maybe letting them know that this is not something that you're willing to engage in long term if they're not willing to do that healing journey. So I think all of that's reasonable, and I think we just need to have more nuanced conversations around this topic, because it's not cut and dry for most people. And I think a lot of people misunderstand just how deeply impactful an addiction to porn can be. So some people just make light of it as if it's not a big deal. And then other people who've maybe experienced living with someone who's gone through it, or maybe they've gone through it themselves, can attest to just how deeply painful it can be and how disruptive it can be to their connection to intimate partners. So I think it's important that we continue to talk about this and to take it seriously, and to just maybe recognize that there are things that we can do to limit the amount that we're engaging with this stuff. If we know better, we do better, hopefully, and then also to hopefully make more resources available so people can deal with the root cause of why this is showing up in their life, as an addiction, right? Because it's not an addiction to everyone, much like, lots of different kinds of drugs and whatnot aren't necessarily addictive to every single person, right? So people are drawn to certain things, or sometimes it's based on availability, and let's face it, like I said, it's available 24/7 at touch of a finger, right? So it's not exactly hard to get. So sometimes it comes down to availability, but also what it does in a person's brain, right? The release of certain chemicals in the brain that over time, you need to watch more and more and more to get those kinds of chemical, happy, feel-good hormone releases, right? So, we can talk about what happens to a person physiologically, but also, there's the escapism that's happening, and the self-coping and whatnot, or self-soothing that's happening. We need to address that, right? So lots to talk about and think about. I'd love to hear what you think. Is it a hard boundary for you, and how have you navigated that in your relationships? How has that been met by potential partners or current partner? If you feel like sharing, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you been through a relationship with someone who was addicted to porn, and you've come out of it sort of with thoughts, feelings around it, one way or another? Love to hear from you, and as always, feel free to private message me if you want to talk privately. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Namaste.